Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to Where Women Choose to Walk, Paths to Improving Cities and Nature. Joining me today is my co-host and dear colleague, Dr. Adrina Berdekshian, with whom I share this project and this series. Today, we want to tackle women and stewardship. What does stewardship mean to you? Who has influenced your engagement in caring for the nature around you? What woman specifically has been your mentor or has influenced you? So, joining us today will be Dr. Lindsay Campbell of the United States Forest Service with the New York Urban Field Station, Wenda Lee with Elite Care from Toronto, Canada, and Agustina Iskandar Krombach from Indonesia. Together, we'll discuss and share our narratives, and we hope that you'll choose to share yours with us as well. So it's really exciting to have all of you here, and I just wanted to show you an array of where everybody's coming from today. So that this is pretty exciting. A lot of us are coming, of course, from Canada, US, and Mexico, but we have folks that have participated, at least in the past, from Russia, from Ukraine, from Ghana, and now we have folks from Bangladesh, Nepal, Colombia, Peru, etc. So welcome everyone, and wherever you are from the world, around the world. And before we begin, I just wanted to mention that this is a safe space. It's a judgment-free space, so we invite all opinions here, and everyone is welcome to join the discussion. We are recording this session, so if you do want to remain anonymous, please feel free to turn off your camera, change your name on the participant list, and we will maintain that integrity. We do ask that during the discussion or during the presentation too, that you mute your microphones. That will help not distract our panelists. And then if you do have any questions or comments during the presentations, please type them in the chat box and we'll address them during the discussion period. And so today, I will begin with my story and then send it over to Adrina. And then we'll invite Lindsay, Wenda, and Agustina to join us and tell us about their really interesting narratives. And then we'll open it up and ask you all to join in the discussion. So before I do that, actually, I want to go over to the Jamboard and just take a look because I see that people are still joining us. And oh, this is so wonderful. I'm glad I'm seeing this. So this is the Jamboard where we hope that you will continue to populate with your stories or your answers to the questions of how do you practice stewardship in the place where you live or work, and or what woman in your life has really influenced you to engage in stewardship. So this is great. This is such a nice thing to see, and we'll visit this again at the end. So for those that don't know me, I was born in the Philippines and I came here in 1985. And on the left-hand side with the hat is my mom, and that is our farm in the south of the Philippines. And she was my late mother. She was the one who really influenced the way that I thought about nature from a really young age. We used to take really long walks together to school instead of taking the jeepney, which is the preferred mode of transportation in the Philippines. We would walk together under the acacia branches, stop and smell gardenias along the way, which we call rosal, talk about different plants. She'll have me scramble up a tree if I wanted to get a mango from an overhanging branch. And so I had a lot of scraped knees. And I remember when we went to the US for the first time, I was 5. And I tasted an orange at that time and an apple for the first time. And it was unlike anything I'd ever tasted. And this is me coming from the land of mangoes and jackfruit. So when I went back to the Philippines at the age of 7, I missed oranges and apples. And so my mom decided to take me to a farmer's market, get us, and at that point it was very expensive to get some oranges and apples. They were all important. And I would keep all the seeds and I would start, you know, guerrilla gardening. I didn't even know there was a term for that. And then they would get uprooted, and I'd ask for more oranges, and my mom would always spoil me and say, okay, let's get more oranges for you. She never knew that I was actually planting until I told her. And she said, you should probably not plant oranges and apples here. Maybe you can help me garden other and raise other kinds of fruits and vegetables. And we did. We raised locally grown fruits and vegetables in our backyard. So we had an avocado tree, a mango tree, a manzanita tree, little bursts of apple-like berries. And I love scrambling and hiding from my mother and father, especially when I was in trouble, and would scramble up those trees. And that love for gardening extended to today, to my kids. So that's Sebastian on the left-hand side with my mom, and he is now 13. At that time, he was 5, helping to plant his first tree. And then Teo is currently 8, and that's him in the middle with the Make the Climate Great Again. And they both have a love for nature in different ways. Both of them love bugs. So in our household, we've raised silkworms, Madagascar hissing cockroaches, we've also raised tomato horn greenworms. Thankfully, not now, while we do have tomato plants in the backyard. And we've gone scavenger hunting for best beetles under logs. We've looked at birds, and they are always picking up trash whenever we go for a walk. And so, with that, that is my attempt at engaging them early on at stewardship. And what does stewardship mean to me? It means service. It means service in the care of your community, of your ecosystem. I didn't even know that word existed until I joined the Forest Service 22 years ago. So now here I am as a mother and an educator. I do volunteer at their schools, at least pre-lockdown. And I help the community with whatever needs they have in terms of building awareness and hopefully capacity. I am not necessarily a technical person, but I do know the right people because I am in the right agency. So with that, that is my narrative for today, and I hope that that inspires you to share some of your stories. And I'm going to turn this over to my great friend and co-host, Dr. Adrina Bardekian.
Thanks, Liza. It's just inspiring to hear all these different stories from people. For me, when I was growing up, we used to travel back and forth from Italy, and we lived there part time. And there was an orchard of orange trees in behind our home, and that my sister and I we would climb those every day, and we were really little, and that's really my first memory of kind of being outside and exploring nature alone without any kind of adult or parental instruction or direction. And when I think about that time, I mean, it's for me, it's really about my mom and my grandmother who have been the most inspiring women in my life, and because of them, my thoughts about stewardship and the associations around what stewardship means is really rooted in nurture and care and love, and less so much about actual green spaces, because it really wasn't the forefront of my family's and my culture's kind of the way we lived. But it's really about community and community ties and the people who sort of lived and showed us their dedication and their commitment to their culture and family and raising kids. And so for me, stewardship is, when I think back throughout my childhood, and where I've come in my career, it's really been about, again, about this idea around nurturing. And when Liza and I first started this discussion series, it started with this idea of motherhood, and I think it's really tied to that notion of care and love and nurture. And I was raised that way, and again, just throughout our travels as a family, I saw that in the different communities where we lived, and so I really feel that now when I look at my own daughter and watch her, and this is a picture of her on the right. Um, and she just loves, I mean, kids love being outside, but she just loves being in parks and collecting sticks. I mean, in this case, a log, I suppose. But she loves hugging trees and touching rocks and putting her hands in the soil and running after squirrels and robins. It's just such a joy to kind of see that in her. And for me, where I've come in my work, to be able to also teach her about what those things are and the proper names. And she's now starting to remember what certain trees, specific trees and specific flowers are called on the grounds of our property, and she wants to always kind of visit and do this circuit and say hello to these various trees. So it's really been heartwarming to kind of see that, and special for me to kind of also learn and kind of help her experience nature in that way, and hopefully that'll last throughout her life. So um, I'm really, it's really inspiring for me to be able to see how she learns and processes these different things, and it's helped me reflect on my own work in urban forestry and appreciate the people that I work with. And so as I mentioned, I'm the director of engagement and research with Tree Canada, and it's a national NGO here in Canada, and we work on greening urban spaces across the country with various communities. And so the people that I work with also inspire me every day in the work that we do. And I don't get a lot of chances now to be outside in my work and sort of the research components and the engagement components, but speaking with people and kind of creating and continuing these kinds of discussions is really important for me, because it inspires me to then turn that over to in my personal life and in my family life as well. So I want to thank you all for joining Liza and I today. We really are thrilled about this discussion and grateful for your time and your insights. We're pleased again to welcome you to the third episode of Where Women Choose to Walk, on women in stewardship in urban green spaces. And again, as we started thinking about this month's topic, we spent a lot of time talking about what it means to care about nature, and how that emotional connection really drives us to action and drives others to action. And with all our episodes, we wanted to embrace storytelling and the various experiences that our guests today especially bring to their work in urban natural resources, and how they pursue their vocations in all the different ways. Next slide, Liza, please. And so we'll be exploring a series of questions today through the presentations and through the discussions coming up. What does it mean to be a steward? What are the various ways in which stewardship can impact communities? Why is stewardship sometimes thought of as only a volunteer effort? What is the role of storytelling in stewardship activities? What are women's roles as stewards in urban natural resources? And what are some of the barriers they face in their engagement? How can culture influence stewardship for women? How can you engage and mobilize people to become meaningful stewards in their communities? And who is or isn't currently served in current systems of stewardship? And so again, Liza and I are grateful to our panelists for sharing their time and insights on this important discussion. Thank you, Lindsay, Wenda, Agustina, for being here today. And I now am thrilled to invite Lindsay, our first panelist, to share her story and provide an in-depth introduction to this topic and the work that she does.
Great, thanks, Adrina. Next slide. I want to thank Adrina and Liza for having me and creating this whole series. So I'm a social scientist with the Forest Service based in New York City, and I study how and why people engage with local environments and communities. So I want to say off the bat that I'm not an expert in gender studies, and that's not the primary lens that I bring to my work, but my work focuses almost completely on stewardship, including through this feminist lens of care work. And my goal today is to introduce and orient you to a few key concepts to ground our discussion and share some examples of the ways in which our team in New York has worked to make those stewardship practices more visible. Next slide. So I'll also situate myself in the story with two women that play a key role in shaping how I look at stewardship, my mom and my daughter. So my childhood was in southwestern Michigan, a small town of 3,000 people. We lived across the street from a 40-acre park. And when my mom walked through that hilly landscape, she saw an amphitheater. And she started a community theater festival that persists every year for 40 years. And it's really the main social and community event in this small town. And I learned from my mom the power of green space to serve as a platform for creativity and community cohesion. And fast forward to this past year of COVID-19 and sheltering at home, I've been spending a lot of time in my Brooklyn neighborhood with my 3-year-old, and she's been teaching me how to see and appreciate nature, nearby nature anew, to learn from its rhythms and cycles and to understand it as kin. So I'll share a bunch of links at the end to learn more about these women and their legacies. And personally, I carry the lessons of these two generations with me as I seek to understand the ways in which we can foster more meaningful, reciprocal, and inclusive relationships with nature and our communities. So next slide. Let's start again with the word stewardship. And on the Jamboard and in Liza and Adrina's talks, you heard a number of personal examples of how you connect to this concept. One definition for stewardship is the activity of protecting, taking care, or being responsible for something. And in a natural resource management context, that usually means nature or the environment. And an important distinction for me working in urban settings is that you don't need to be a landowner to be a steward. Anyone can participate in these acts of caretaking or claims making through stewardship. So it's a highly accessible form of civic engagement on streets, in parks, and in our shared collective spaces throughout our cities. Next slide. Here are some specific examples that you may have come across: tree planting, community gardening, watershed restoration, removal of litter, removal of invasives, creation of green spaces. But next slide. In addition to that sort of very tangible hands-on work, we also want to emphasize the role of advocacy and education as part of the ways that stewards work to create and shape our local environments. And transformation include practices that are trying to shape the sustainability of multi-sited systems like the waste system, the energy system, and the food system. I also want to underscore that stewardship groups are not only environmental groups. They are civic associations, youth groups, senior groups, a wide range of actors who are seeking to advance community quality of life through this engagement with the local environment. And I think we need to understand and work with this full set of actors in order to build a more equitable system of stewardship. Next slide. So stewardship is clearly diverse, but whatever form it takes, to me, the heart and soul of stewardship is about care. And I think we need to share our stewardship stories to understand and build more relations of care. So I'm going to unpack these two concepts of care and stories and why I think they can help support our urban natural resource management work. Next slide. So focus on care is not new. Feminist theorists and artists like Meryl Latimer Euclides have put this at the center of their work for decades, acknowledging the importance of ongoing care work, often done by women, whose labor is undervalued, unvalued, or even unseen. And some discussions on care work focus where you might expect it. So health aides, mothers, daycare workers, nurses, folks who provide direct hands-on assistance in ensuring the health and safety of our population. But increasingly, both scholars and activists are emphasizing the role of care work in other public domains: sanitation workers, park workers, whose labor provides crucial maintenance to our collectively used resources. And I aim to build upon this surfacing not only of the labor, but of the love and the ethic involved in caring that can serve as a wellspring for creativity and for meaning making. So environmental scholars have identified care, along with knowledge and agency, as being the three conceptual underpinnings of stewardship. And they draw particular attention to the need to better understand care as a potential pathway towards more sustainable outcomes. So if we can center on care in our environmental stewardship work, I think we can surface and amplify the sometimes less seen but crucial everyday practices by residents, civic leaders, and public servants in shaping and caring for places, communities, and ecosystems. Next slide. So through sharing stories, we can both learn from multiple worldviews and cultures and find different ways to understand and envision and even create alternative futures. So storytelling, from personal stories to origin stories to sacred texts, provides a cross-cultural means for sharing experience, lifeways, and ways of knowing. And in particular, my colleague Heather McMillan has informed my thinking on the importance of learning from Indigenous knowledge and local ecological knowledge as we aim to support biocultural stewardship. And I like this simple quote, "Change the story and you change the city." Goldstein and others have focused on the practice of collective storytelling that can help shape planning trajectories because we can have an alternative way of envisioning new futures. The photos on this slide are from an engagement we did with artist Carmen Bouillet, and it really came out of necessity. We were tabling about our stewardship research at a lot of community events, and we weren't getting a lot of attraction to our sort of drab flyer. You know, we were doing a lot of one-way, take our survey kind of community outreach. And instead we realized we needed to have a two-way mechanism for listening and learning from folks to really surface why stewardship matters by asking people to share a place and a time in which they cared for their local environment and put it on the map. And we've run this exercise with everyone from third graders to global professionals at the World Forestry Congress. And we found that it reveals that stewardship and care are really centered on connection to people and place. And it's helped us to find common ground in unexpected places and across difference. Next slide. So my colleagues at the Forest Service and I, particularly Erica Svensson, have been researching civic stewardship for the past 18 years. And our signature project is called StewMap. That's a survey where we identify and map all the civic stewardship groups in our city. We've sought out new modes for understanding, visualizing, and supporting those stewards that go beyond the sort of academic articles and the databases that we produce to really bring those stories to life. So in September 2019, we mounted the exhibition Who Takes Care of New York at the Queens Museum. And we created a transdisciplinary space where artists, scientists, and stewards made knowledge together. And artists, I believe, help us tell more powerful, emotionally resonant, and compelling stories. Our goal with this exhibition was to leave visitors with an understanding of their capacity to make lasting change in their neighborhoods through care. And I'm just going to share a few highlights from the exhibition with you. Next slide. This growing understanding of the importance of care work goes hand in hand with an expanded understanding of infrastructure. It's not just the gray stuff of the built environment or even the green and blue stuff of natural and nature-based features, but it's also the social infrastructure, the people, organizations, and networks that enable that space to function as a public good. So with that spirit and focus, we wanted to amplify the voices of stewards themselves as agents of change. We want to share the spaces, stories, territories, and actions of the diverse range of folks involved in creating, advocating for, and transforming the local environment. We put them on a large-scale map shown here that covered one wall of the exhibition space. Next slide. And we invited the public to add their own stories to an online map at a kiosk, which we've preserved as a digital story map. And I'll drop a link at the end in the chat where hopefully you all can share your own stewardship stories and add to our growing global map. Next slide. So where and how do these acts of care happen in our urban environments? Artist Matthew Lopez Jensen trains his eye on the street tree, that form of nearby nature that for so many urban dwellers is their first entry into stewardship action. And Jensen recognizes the diversity of care practices from homemade tree guards to ornate gardens, and he even participates in stewardship by becoming a licensed citizen pruner. Next slide. How can we understand the collective impact and the individual experiences of thousands of stewards? Magali Duzant's work explores the knowledge, practices, and actions of stewards in Queens, New York, revealing that each of these dots on our stewardship map is composed of unique lifeways and histories. So she created Whole Queens Catalog as a limited run publication that shares anecdotes, recipes, disaster survival techniques, and other practical wisdom from stewardship groups in Queens, New York. Next slide. Our research also explores the networked structure of the system of stewardship, including, importantly, the ways it is distributed unevenly across the landscape. So civic stewardship groups collaborate across a broad constellation of stakeholders, and StewMap asks groups who they work with in order to visualize those vital connections of ideas, partnerships, and resources. And over time, these relationships shape governance across sectors and influence the policy agenda and the form of the city. Next slide. But how do we show the strength of a network? Jody Lin Ki Chow's work uses a patchwork dress, a picnic, and a participatory performance to demonstrate the ways in which the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Lin Ki Chow's participatory picnic performance creates spaces for the public to have conversations. Inspired by her grandmother, she sews together vinyl tablecloths, making dresses that double as picnic blankets. And her performance invited and centered stewardship groups that focus on food justice issues that she identified through the StewMap database. Next slide. The exhibition explored the ways in which stewards adapt to change and are actively involved in envisioning and enacting new worlds. So as part of disturbance and recovery cycles, stewards can help support communities and landscapes through environmental actions, playing a role of what we have termed as green responders. And this pattern has repeated in New York City and across many locations, but we've looked at it in the context of the fiscal crisis of the 1970s, September 11th terrorist attacks, Hurricane Sandy, and now COVID-19. Next slide. Julia Oldham's photographic collage series presents a vision of New York City's future, especially with regard to climate change. And during her artist residency, she interviewed groups in the StewMap database, scientists, park rangers, gardeners, beekeepers, educators, and volunteers, and asked them to share their visions of the future. And these ranged from utopian to less optimistic, and she used those narratives to create these collage photographic depictions like you see here of how we might live differently with beavers. This is called Beaver Village. Next slide. So through this quick walkthrough of an exhibition, I've attempted to show how we wanted to foster these exchanges among stewards, scientists, land managers, artists, and educators, and by sharing stories across cultures and geography. I think that storytelling, arts, and map making can be used to strengthen our relationships of care between each other and place, and to inspire, enliven, and really broaden the field of natural resource management. I guess I believe that care matters and it's not finite, and if we can see it more clearly and share it, we can learn from it and maybe even grow it. Next slide. To sum up another way, why does stewardship matter? Research has shown that stewardship can provide a means by which people commit to purpose, catalyze change in communities, serve as a form of empowerment, play a role in helping communities recover from disturbance, and create benefits that extend into the future by building and strengthening communities. So that's a lot, and I think it bears paying attention to. Next slide. Finally, honing in on the role of women, there is a body of work specifically exploring the question of women's engagement in environmental stewardship, and I want to acknowledge the research of Adrina Bardakjian, our host on this. But from our work in New York City, we found that women are less likely to visit urban natural areas like woods and meadows, due in part to historic and current concerns over crime and safety. But those who participate in stewardship programs are more likely to visit natural areas. We also found that women are overrepresented among volunteers in urban forest stewardship programs, and that includes tree planting efforts like the Million Trees campaign, as well as tree monitoring efforts like the Trees Count campaign. So overall, from that, I take that stewardship can be a key pathway to greater inclusion in our public lands and landscapes. Next slide. These are some of the questions I put forth for discussion, but I think they've been well rolled into those that Adrina laid out at the beginning, and I look forward to diving in on them more. I will drop the link in the chat for you to share your own story. And I'll just close the next slide with a thank you to my collaborators, especially Erica Svensson, Michelle Johnson, Laura Landau, Sophie Plitt. With those 4 women, this work is a co-creation with all of them. So thanks for your time and attention, and I look forward to the next panelist.
Thank you, Lindsay, so much for that comprehensive and inspiring introduction. And I always, every time I speak to you, I learn something new. It's amazing. And thank you for kind of also bringing up the fact that stewardship isn't necessarily about environmentalism the way we kind of traditionally think about that. It's and sort of broader civic engagement. So again, thank you. Amazing. And it's with great pleasure that and great respect that I invite our next panelist to share her story, Wenda Lee, who has been an inspiration to me ever since I met her over a decade ago now in my work in pursuing women's leadership and gender equity in urban forestry and arboriculture. She is a climber and educator extraordinaire, but she's also a friend and a kindred spirit. And Wenda, thank you so much for being with us here today. And we look forward to your story.
Thank you, Adrina. And thank you, Lindsay. To be honest, I had to look up the word stewardship in preparation for this talk because this is a term that I don't use enough. So thank you for your presentation. Hello, everyone. I'm going to first start by defining an arborist because not many people are familiar with this term. And when I tell people that I'm an arborist, I usually get a questionable look and they said, what, an arsonist? So an arborist is a skilled professional that takes care of trees with emphasis on promoting tree health and managing for safety. And often in an urban environment, this slide shows my outdoor office view when I'm pruning trees, and that's the Toronto skyline. Arborists are not foresters, and that's a confusion. A forester manages tens of thousands of hectares of trees, and we're not landscapers either, who are more concerned with aesthetics. A climbing arborist is someone who works at height, which involves wearing a specially designed climbing harness, and we use ropes and hardware to climb trees. Myself, I like to be referred to as a professional tree hugger. When I was in grade 12, I had a wonderful opportunity to attend a 3-week outdoor wilderness program called Outward Bound Canada. And this has had such a profound impact on my life as it opened my eyes and my heart to connecting with trees and nature. So that was my role model as a teenager, this program. This was a huge revelation for me because growing up in Toronto, I didn't really think much about trees, let alone considering a career working with trees. Consequently, I went on to obtain a degree in forestry in the mid to late 1980s. So I've been an arborist for 30 years. Not only has this career been my livelihood, but it's also been my life vocation, connecting with trees. I currently work for a small tree care company based out of Toronto, and we mainly service residential clients. We provide all aspects of tree care, pruning, removals, tree planting, consultations, and fertilization. The only service we don't provide is chemical spraying. So within the company, I wear many different hats as an arborist, and each role contributes to a different component of stewardship. As a climbing arborist, which is my forte and what brings me the most happiness at work, I'm working with the crews doing the actual tree work. We do a lot of mature tree pruning, which means we get to climb 100-year-old trees, often in a tiny backyard, as you can see with the previous slide and this slide. This is a walnut, and these are typical backyards in Toronto, small bungalow, tiny postage size backyard. And so, you know, climbing such a huge biomass, and we're mainly cutting out dead wood and structurally hazardous limbs, or cutting back limbs from buildings and other infrastructure. So most of our work is done by manually climbing trees. This this photo is from this winter. It's one of the biggest white oaks I have had the pleasure of pruning. That's me off to the left-hand side. And we spent literally about 6 to 7 hours with 4 of us pruning out dead wood from this magnificent oak. So as a consulting arborist, I can be writing arborist reports. Actually, in fact, I write a lot of reports with respect to applying for tree removal and tree injury permits, which is required in the City of Toronto. I work with architects in prescribing ways to protect trees during construction. I'm involved with making recommendations on tree planting plans and doing tree health assessments. At this point in my career, I spent a lot of my time as a job estimator, which involves meeting with property owners to discuss about tree maintenance procedures and to provide the cost of doing the work. Out of all my duties as an arborist, this is the most challenging part of my job. There's always this tug of war within me when I meet clients, because on the one hand, I spend a lot of time educating people on the value of trees, a lot of dispelling myths about being fearful of their trees. The trees are too big, they're too close to my house. Or I can be explaining what not to do to their trees. And then on the other hand, I'm having to sell our services as we are, a commercial-based business. So essentially, I'm conflicted between being a steward and being a salesperson, with my integrity bridging the two roles. This picture here shows what, in terms of this garage is being converted to a laneway suite, and we're preserving this large oak tree. So some arborists would say, just remove the tree. I took on the challenge with the architect that we were going to preserve this tree with the construction. So a lot of times I decline on bidding on jobs which don't conform to my moral and ethical standards to protect and preserve trees, but often it's providing education to my clients and having to compromise and negotiate between the client's wishes and what's best for the trees. Ironically, I get more referrals from clients by simply telling them what they don't need to do to their trees. Clients always love it when I inspect their trees and say, you know what, your tree's in pretty good condition and it doesn't require any work. Or I tell them that you're actually wasting your money by thinking that this type of pruning is going to make your grass grow or, increase that much more sunlight to your vegetable garden. As a female estimator, I frequently experience hesitation and even scrutiny from clients upon first meeting me. Firstly, they're expecting a man, and probably have had several other estimators who are men, talk about their trees, and then they open the door and they see me. And secondly, sometimes I'm telling the client something that is contrary to what other estimators have told them. And this is where I've observed this moral dilemma with many tree service companies, and it's that job estimators who work on a commission-based salary often forego what is best for the trees and go after the monetary gains of selling work that may not be necessary or actually detrimental to tree health and structure. When I first started working as a climbing arborist, I was faced with a lot of obstacles and barriers with respect to gaining acceptance from my coworkers. I initially started working within a large municipality, and I was their first female tree climber. This was in the early 1990s, and the arboricultural industry was predominantly male-centric. I did not fit in with the typical image of a tree worker, this macho looking, bearded, chainsaw wielding worker. I also had to overcome the stigma attached to being a petite Asian woman. And the biggest threat for me was that I was educated, as not many of my coworkers had anything beyond high school education. As a result, I experienced many years of systemic workplace bullying. It was typical that I was given jobs, i.e. trees, that were way beyond my capabilities at that time, in the hopes of watching me fail. Workers actually had a poll to see when I would break. No doubt this was, this stress had took a toll on my mental and physical well-being. And it wasn't easy for me to just simply quit, because there weren't women climbers and women arborists working in the private sector. And I was brainwashed into believing that private companies would never consider hiring a woman, and that the only reason I was hired by the city was because I was a quota for hire, essentially a woman of color. What helped me was my fierce desire to improve on my climbing skills and my passion to work with trees. Luckily, I had an outlet, and I started participating in tree climbing competitions for arborists. And these are skill-based competitions that reflect what climbing arborists do on a daily basis. And the winner of the Ontario competition would go to qualify to the internationals and get to compete with arborists around the world. So secretly, I wanted to be the best one day, just to gain some respect from my peers. So in 2001, the International Tree Climbing Championships allowed women to compete for the first time, and that's after 25 years of being a men-only competition championship. So that's when I started competing internationally. And in the following year, my dream came true, and I won the women's world title, which helped catapult my career. For women, these climbing competitions isn't just about, bragging rights, but more importantly, it's about raising awareness and visibility by showcasing what women are capable of doing within the industry. By and large, this industry, the arboricultural industry, is still male dominated, but the roles are diversifying, and there are certainly more women as climbers and in supervisory positions, where before female arborists were seen as consultants or working within the plant health care sector. When I first began my career, I had no female mentors and no female role models. In fact, it wasn't until 17 years into my career that I got to work side by side with another woman of comparable skill level as me. In the previous slide, that's a colleague of mine, and never in decades would I imagine being able to work with another Asian arborist every day. So I'm very grateful for that. But times have changed, and now we are in our second generation of women arborists who have become leaders themselves and who are now mentoring a new generation of women in this field. Thank you very much for allowing me to share my story. Thank you.
Glenda, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's so inspiring, and at first infuriating to know that you've gone through so much, but with you, through you, we've also experienced the joy of breaking that tree ceiling or glass ceiling at those treetops, and winning competitions, but also breaking the mold of what it is to be an arborist, to be a steward. It's not just for one gender, and also not just for one ethnicity either. So thank you for that. Adrina, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
No, I just want to thank you, Wenda. Again, you're such an inspiration to me and my work, and I'm really grateful for you sharing this story here today. And I think that as we can see, the chat is just exploding with thanks and sharing those sentiments of inspiration for your work and the hardships you've endured and just paving that way so women that have come afterwards haven't had to endure those challenges that you have. So thank you so much. You're just lovely, and I really appreciate your friendship. Thank you.
So let's turn over to my friend Agustina Iskandar Krombak, who I met just about 3 years ago on a trip to Indonesia. I was there for one meeting, and then my colleagues in the Asia Pacific program asked me to stop over in Jakarta, and I was in Bandung, several hours away, and to meet up with several folks who may be interested in helping us develop an urban forest programs. And Agustina and I met along with our other colleague, and from then on, it was kindred spirit meeting kindred spirit. It was, I just felt so connected to her and to her, not just bubbliness, but her fire and um, her own story of how she, and she's not a forester, and she'll tell you this herself, but she does care for her backyard of Jakarta, but also everywhere else around the world. And so without further ado, I'll let her tell her story. And I really appreciate that she's joining us today from Indonesia, where it is pretty late in the evening. So welcome, Agustina. I'm going to go over to your slides right now, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Yep, so I can start now?
Yes, please. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And it was really great to see you. And then since then too, that you already becoming one of my inspirings, and I always follow all of your stories. So thank you so much for, at the same time, you give me strength as well. And thank you everyone for having me here. That today I want to share my story, and I will start with this story when I was a kid, and then how I choose my stewardship journey in these organizations, in Let's Do It World Movement and World Cleanup Day. So these two, I mean, this organization and the movement that I choose as my voluntary work. So I dedicate my time and all of my energy to serve the people and the planet through these organizations. So we can move to the next slide. I will start with a story when I was a little girl. So not so many people know maybe about the conflict in Aceh, Indonesia. So I was born there from a land of conflict. It's the most western part of Indonesia. The conflict between Aceh Freedom Movement, which is separatist group from Aceh, fighting against Indonesian government, Republic of Indonesia. So unfortunately, I was born during the conflict, and it was like black, how to say, like bloody history that time, when so many people kill easily. So some people just, was killing by gun, and then the body just left on the street. For example, when we go to school, and sometimes we just see the people die in front of our eyes, like so many blood, and sometimes just the next rice field were next to our school. And also then some of friends last night, their dad just killed by people, or we don't know who shoot their dad or their brothers, and etc. So in this kind of situation, when I was born, I was experienced violence, and to see that people torture in front of my eyes, and experience sexual abuse, and then also how that time was really hard time, because we as children, that time was also forced, for example, to be a drug couriers and etc. So was a lot of dark experience, I would say. It was really hard to imagine that I'm still alive until today. But the time that I said to myself, if I have a chance to grow up to become um, an adult, so I promised to myself that I want to become a woman leader, which is have a power to work with so many people, to do good things, to serve the people and planet. So it was basically this idea come out because I was so frustrating to see what happening around me during that conflict. And then but even after the conflict, it was not easy. That the conflict stopped after the tsunami. If you remember that 26th of December uh, in 2004, where that 230,000 people died in our hometown. This is where then the conflict stopped, and during 2005. But even after that, the life is what was not easy, and my dream to become a woman leader, for example, that I was leading so many organizations, and then I forgot that I was living also in the area where the patriarchy, where the people like, not really like when the woman become a leader, or when they become when they spoke up, like, really active in the social, for example. So but for me, that I still have this fire inside of me that I want to do something. But then in during school and university, I try to build the school in my house, where I dedicate this school to children in my village. But then some people also don't like that. They think that I give them like bad influence and etc. And then at the same years, that were the people spread a rumor that we are not Muslim anymore, that you have black magic with your family and etc. And then the people in 2011, the people destroy our house. So then we were expelled from our hometown. So at that moment, I was really like thinking to kill myself, because it was too much for me. And but then I remember my dream. So maybe we can go to next slide. I remember my dream, but I always want to become a woman leader, that I cannot let these people take this dream for me. So I said to myself that, okay, people can try to take everything from me, but not my dream, because that's all what I have. And then I met one mentor also from my organizations called GMB, that he said it's better to die when we fight for something, or when we fight for our dream, rather we die when in doubt, and then we don't fight for anything. This words is like a magic for me. Then I decided to move to Jakarta. When the time like I finished my university, then I moved to Jakarta, and I found the movement that's Let's Do It World movement, and World Cleanup Day. So we can go to next slide. And in that movement, then I think next in that movement, then I think this is then the place for me where I can fight for planet at the same time, and also to continue my dream to work with so many people to do good things. So this is where I see then my stewardship journey. So this is the chance for me basically to work and to do really big thing for my country, but not only for my country, to work to do good things for the people, for human and the planet itself. And I see this as a vehicle to unite everyone from different background. Uh, since I also want to tell people something, that you can do this kind of thing to me, do bad things to me, but I will never do the same. I will show you how to love, how to love. When I want to give this message of love, how to love people, and to how to love the planet itself. So And then in this movement, then I decided to really use this as a vehicle to unite people. Since that Indonesia, we have more than 1,300 ethnics and 1,000 of language, also 1,000 of religions. So we need really, I think I really need to find something where can unite these people, and they are doing something together without asking like what is your religion, and without asking what is your ethnic, how these people can have the same missions. Because I see this clean up, when they do clean up, for example, they don't need to know what is your religion. What we know that we have the same love for this planet. So we just do good things together. And next, and I then really found this as not really also not really like vehicle to unite people, but also the mission itself. When in the past during the conflict, I always see that I really miss to see peace in my land, and this is why that I want to become a woman leader, which can bring this peace message to everyone. And this here, I feel like okay, then I can fight for peace and environmental at the same time. So it's a good mission where it's nothing else, like can unite people, which is like they cannot say no for this movement, because this is our home. We have to take care of our home. And yeah, and then then I try to work with so many organizations, with the government, with corporate, and bring all the organizations together. We found a team which they're working so good, and with so many regions and islands in Indonesia. So I would say that also so many women basically on my side, that they decided after that to become a woman leader. And more than 50% of our leaders in the islands, in the regions, are women, and they really fight to do good things together. So next. So I will show maybe in the next slide that you can see this is what we have. Like Indonesia produce more than 167 million tons of waste every day, and most of them 30% are mismanaged, and they end up in the ocean, like you see, then on the street, on the village, and also in our forest, for example, where so many illegal dumping right now pollute our forest too. So this is why that we are moving everyone, just come on board. If we are not doing now, we just too late already. And then like so many women come to help me too, and then they say, okay, I will take a lead too in my region, I will take a lead in my island, and I always use also my story to tell them what's make me want to do all of these things, basically what is motivate me. And I tell them, I share with them about the values what I have, and then we bring the mission of love to everyone. And I also have the values inside of me. This voluntary work action is always my value. Even I have my own job, I will always dedicate myself to do something which help the planet and people itself. And next, in the next picture, you will also see that more trust that we gather, more people come on board to help in the beach and just everywhere. So this is this movement has become really big actions. Then basically we are the biggest movement who lead the clean up action in the world. And I mean, World Clean Up Day in Indonesia, they bring a lot of volunteers. In the next slide, we can see that the number what we have. You will see the number. I will show you. This is what we have. So if you see there, relawan means volunteers, and waste mean sampah mean waste. So you see that from 2018, this 7.6 million volunteers we gather, and 14,000 tons of waste. And last year during pandemic, that we gather 4.1 million volunteers and 4,000 tons of waste. So we bring also so many governors on board to do clean up with us together, and ministry and Minister of Environment, even also helping us during the campaign through video, through letter to everyone to come on board to help us to do this cleanup action. So I would say that this journey, when we really believe in our values, which is my values is living beyond yourself, or living beyond myself. So I dedicate my life that not only living for myself, that since it was a miracle that I'm still alive until today. So I use this as a really good opportunity to give back to people, to serve human, to serve the planet itself. So then these values that I always try to spread also to the people, to live beyond ourselves, that there is something that we need to take care of. But because if we, all of us, didn't take care of, or didn't do something to keep peace and environment in our planet, then we will really see that how we will live in really, I don't know how to explain. I was experiencing this conflict land, and we see like a lot of our, we lose of our paradise in everywhere. So yeah, we will lose our lovely forest, for example, as our paradise in everything. We really destroy not only planet but ourselves. So yeah, this is my value. In the last slide, I would say living beyond yourself, and the same message I want to say for all of you too. Thank you for listening to my story.
Terima kasih, Agustina. Thank you. Your journey has been really inspiring, and we're really happy about how you've overcome all this. And I know we're going to have a lot of questions from the audience for you as well. I know that we do have a video that you wanted to share with us, right? So I will cue that up. Adrina, if you have something to say while I cue things up, I will stop sharing my screen for just a second.
Sure. Thanks, Liza. And thank you, Agustina, for that really different perspective that you offer. And one of the things I think that's been really moving for me from my perspective is sort of hearing about the different just how, like, the different perspectives that you offer, and the background that you come from, and the motivators for you are very different than what I've experienced and what I've heard from my own work with women in the U.S. and Canada. It's just it's such a world of difference in again, kind of motivators and what drives you, and the drivers that kind of inspire you. So thank you so much for sharing your story, and I look forward to seeing the video.
Thank you. And Allison? Okay, perfect. Thank you for that video, Allison and Agustina. So wonderful. And I think what she had not mentioned, and we can talk about later on, is that she started off with just a handful of volunteers in Jakarta, And it's grown to what you've seen now in terms of those numbers in the millions. And we're talking about literally a handful of volunteers, and not just in Jakarta anymore. It's all across the entire archipelago. So thank you for that. And I know that there are a lot of messages in the chat as well as questions. And before we turn to them, Adrina, I'm going to queue up your discussion questions again for everyone to take a look at. Okay.
Thanks, Liza. So yeah, and this really is intended to be a launching point for discussion amongst the panelists as well as the participants, and we welcome hearing your stories as well. If you want to speak, please feel free to do so openly, or you can put a note in the chat if you'd like. If you have questions, same thing. You feel free to unmute yourself and speak, or put a question in the chat for our panelists as well. I think what I'd like to do is kind of bring it back just to start us off to the idea of storytelling and narrative, and how stories drive us and inspire us and change our perspective and broaden our horizons and all of these things. And I'd really like to invite Lindsay to kind of circle back and comment on some of the things that you had talked about in your introductory presentation. Just sort of reintroducing the idea of stories and storytelling in how that influences stewardship and motivates people to action.
Yeah, thanks for that opportunity. Wow, tough acts to follow, right? Such amazing stories, but I think the evidence is right there in front of us. I think stories are a way that we share our life lessons. We share our own authentic worldviews and lived experiences. We mobilize others, sometimes in the millions in the case of Augustina. We show what's possible by being, path breakers like Wenda, like sort of first of her kind, which helps us sort of envision and inspire new worlds. I am primarily a qualitative researcher, so stories and narrative are what I work with. But in developing this StewMap methodology, we were trying to speak a little bit more the language of quantitative science, putting dots on a map. And that's powerful too, to see the whole system of stewardship, but I keep coming back to every one of those dots is a story, and we need to share those stories in order to kind of open up space to learn from each other. And so I've certainly learned a lot just from the two of you on this call. And I think storytellings, lastly, not only have to reflect reality, they can help us imagine alternatives, from fables to fiction to collective storytelling. And we don't have to only reflect the reality as it is. We can kind of shape new views. And I feel like if you can name it and you can see it, you can kind of start to enact it. And in a more wonky, like policy sort of setting, putting that worldview or articulating that discourse like sort of down in paper has power, and it becomes like a written touchstone that can get referred to. And it takes a long time to go from the story to the implementation and the reality, but if you don't have the story and the vision to start with, it's hard to get there from here. So those are just a few reflections.
Thank you for that, Lindsay. And I think that we can collectively agree that in forums such as this discussion series, that the power of the stories help us connect with each other, maybe in a way that allows us to have someone understand us that may not come from our own backyard necessarily. I certainly connected a lot with Wenda's story and Agustino's story in a very different way. With Wenda as an Asian American, 22 or 23 years ago, when I decided to join the Forest Service, I started out as an intern. But coming from a Filipino family, they didn't understand the idea that I wanted to be a steward. When I could be of service in the medical industry as a doctor or as a lawyer. And I think you know going back home almost every 2 years to the Philippines, there was a lot of not necessarily bullying but teasing about, what do I know about trees? Yes, women are gardeners, etc. And things have come a long way since then. And I lived in the Philippines as a child during a time of conflict as well. And engagement at that time, even though I was working with my mom and growing our gardens, it was also about food security because at that time there was such a big upheaval and conflict against the former dictator President Marcos, who you know, uh, created a conflict that would last for years. And so, what does that mean? And they took me to my very first rally at the age of 10. And I knew then, like Agustina, that I had to be of service in different ways. And it doesn't have to be just in the environmental stewardship way, it could also be in terms of advocacy and awareness. And at that point, my parents were staunch activists. And so they brought me at the age of 10. They wove their cars through the rally towards the really underserved communities just to see what it was like for a lot of my fellow countrymen. And to experience that as a 10-year-old really changed my worldview. And I knew that even though I wanted to be a doctor at that time, that I wanted to be more, um, I guess, intentional about the awareness factor. And so now I do that through helping kids in the community here, teaching them about environmental stewardship, teaching them about loving bugs and nature, but also being a volunteer teacher in the community at their schools and at other schools. So that's, thank you for your stories. And I just want to tell you that I really connected with both of you.
Thanks, Liza, for sharing your story and your insights. I think and we do have a hand up actually. Georgia.
Oh, hi. Is it okay to respond to the questions or one of the questions?
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm just going to look at my notes, otherwise I won't remember. It's not very long, but I just wanted to thank the presenters and, of course, you and Liza for this wonderful opportunity. I wanted to say that being present in a space or one's presence in a space is a form of storytelling. And I found that to be the case for myself in the work that I do, because sometimes I'm one or a few people of color. Telling stories also makes people more aware of natural phenomenon around them. The third thing I wanted to mention is that providing storytelling opportunities, especially in urban settings, brings out people's own nature experiences. And I found that to be definitely true, especially in some of the bird work that I do. And I do this in New York City, and New Yorkers have lots of stories to tell about their engagements with wild birds and other kinds of nature, ranging from flowers to trees. So providing those opportunities is really wonderful. And then I guess the fourth thing is I'm really pleased at this expansive definition of stewardship. And so I'm a big fan of those 6 types of ways to steward, and I'm happy that the U.S. Forest Service, Lindsay and her crew have brought this forward. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Georgia. And I mean, just to comment on something you said, I really spending kind of a lot of time going back and forth from Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. One of the things I remember the most about my time in Vancouver is sort of a town called Deep Cove, where they had barcodes on trees in the park where you could essentially learn about the tree, and you could scan it and you could write a letter to the tree and you could learn about this tree. And it was just, it really resonated with me as someone who loves trees, but also in terms of the different stories that people associated with each tree and how different those stories could be based on who they're with at the time and what they're doing and the time in their life, etc. So I really appreciate that comment about stories and space. One of the things, I guess I'll put a question out there. In my work and research with arborists in Southern Ontario, one of the narratives that kind of was revealed and kept coming across was this idea of self-reflection and how arborists saw themselves as nurturers and caregivers. And Wenda, you touched on that during your talk, and especially this idea of looking after the urban forest canopy one tree at a time. And I remember that always sticks with me in our conversations. And so can maybe you touch on that a little bit and speak a little bit more about your role and how you see yourself, and whether you see yourself as an environmentalist first and foremost, and how that might influence your work and also the perspective of others in your circles.
Oh, all right. This is for me.
Yes, it's for you.
Well, climbing a tree or working with trees, like what exactly, like, I'm working in one property at a time, and that one tree could be the forest for that backyard. And when you look at it at a microscopic level, it's part of the ecology of that backyard. It's wildlife habitat. It's attracting certain birds to that backyard. So that is the forest. And when you're managing that, and you're also having to managing the expectations of the property owner, they may not like that tree. A lot of clients, they see the tree as a hindrance. They want more sun. They want vegetables. And I'm having to, be the educator for them as well. But sorry, what was, could you repeat part of your question? Because I know I may have gone off tangent there.
No, I think that's fine. I wanted you to comment maybe a bit on how you saw yourself because I know you do, as an environmentalist, and how that might influence your work. But I think you did speak to that. And if you want to speak to that more, I'd love to hear it. But I really like where you were going with this idea of managing expectations and this idea of how sometimes that's in conflict with what's right for the ecology or what's right for the urban canopy or wildlife or species diversity, all of those things, and that people might not want to see that. So not only is your role as an environmentalist, but as you've mentioned before, as an educator and you're the first point of contact with a lot of citizens. And we talk in these forums and these groups and these calls where a lot of the people that are on the calls are already in the know, like they're in this world. They're looking at urban natural resource management and they already care. And so you're the first point of contact in so many ways on the ground with a lot of people that don't know to care, that aren't aware of these things and how they're connected, and what a canopy even is, or I like how you started, or what even an arborist is. So if you can comment a little bit on that, that would be great. Again, this idea of expectation and environmentalism.
I find myself that I'm like the Lorax. I'm the speaker of the trees, because, like, you know, when I walk into a backyard and I see something so magnificent, like a veteran tree, and I speak from my heart. So I'm going, wow, just feel that energy. You know, the air underneath the canopy is even fresher. And so then all of a sudden that client is seeing, oh, this is something different. You know, I've had other, you know, people come in and they're looking at this tree and they're just seeing dollar values. I approach it always from a, you know, what is best for the trees, protecting the trees. I'm trying to teach people, oh, don't be afraid. This is a canker wound, but look, the tree is actually closing up its wound. It's an extraordinary process. And I'm explaining a lot of these scientific and biology associated. It's a engineered organism. It's constantly adapting. You know, we have so much to learn about from the trees, about its resiliency. And that usually within the first couple of seconds, people, you know, they catch on where I'm coming from, and we're having a different conversation. And then at the end, after I've talked about the trees, the whys, then it becomes, then I have to switch gears and say, okay, well, this is what I would recommend. This has to be done. You don't really need to, you know, thin out the canopy, because you're just removing live growth, and it's irrelevant to how much sun you're going to get, because it is not good quality sun that you're going to be, you know, having to you know, grow roses underneath this shade. So I think, and part of the looking at all these questions about, you know, who is or isn't currently served in the system of stewardship, because there's not a lot of women out there as estimators. My approach is different, and having, from a woman's point of view, I'm, you know, expressing that feminine sensibility. You know, women are more nurturing. So I'm coming from a more nurturing point of view, as opposed to this aggressive money-making, you know, point. So again, I think I skewed, came back off topic, and sort of woven different questions.
No, that's great, Wenda. Thank you. I do see a hand up, Novum.
I thought Kiburu was going to go first. So just...
Oh, okay.
Okay. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Can you get me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I want to congratulate Wenda Lee as the speaker of the three. She has done a lot, and she's a model. And I want to appreciate her for her courage to be in that position. I just want to speak on two of the recap discussions. One, the issue of role of storytelling. I feel from what we have thus learned and hear from their own experience, what they have shared with us, definitely stories can make a change in every aspect of our environmental life. Because I know, or I can say it, in my immediate community here in Bauchi State, Nigeria, I have not seen a woman climbing to the, you know, to the high part of the branch of a tree, you know, assessing. I know we have so many forestry staff who are women, but I don't think they have ever gone to 50% of the story I have just learned from Lee. So definitely it's a positive one. Storytelling is a very positive one. Then another thing is the issue of, we know in some places, like in my country in particular, there are some cultures, there are some religious barriers, you know, that sometimes restrict women doing main activities. or sometimes if women are being seen doing this type of activities, you know, there will be a lot of bullying, a lot of negative discouragement from the general populace. So I feel storytelling, advocacy, visits, you know, forming some cluster groups to discuss environmental issues, you know, which would at a later time now can be developed to a wider, by forming more groups that would develop a network between respective communities within. I'm sure that will do more, and it will add more value to this issue, as mentioned in how can you engage and mobilize people to become meaningful stewards. So I think with these activities, I'm sure there will be a positive changes towards environmentalism, where people adopt positive attitudes towards environment, and the women will be given more chance to participate actively and contribute their own quota. You see, she has a lot of stories to tell. She has a lot of experience to share. Why? Because she's a woman and she was not expected to be in that position, and she has successfully done it. So it's a very good story to be shared with all of us today. I inspire Lee in that position. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. Novum.
Hi, thank you everybody. Thank you Liza and Adrina for organizing this, for Lindsay for letting me know about this, and then Wenda and Augustina for sharing your inspiring stories. There are so many things that I can relate to about many of your stories, and I'm going to try and address the stewardship scene as sort of volunteer work. And I think it has something to do with like what Lindsay mentioned, sort of care being seen as unpaid labor. I actually share Liza's experience of family members asking me why I'm not studying medicine or you know, something that would, you know, make money. Because I think it came from a place of kind of concern and love, like, you know, they didn't see being an environmentalist as sort of a way of making a living. And I think at the time anyway, their vision of what protecting the environment looked like was like Greenpeace, you know, sort of this very kind of, you know, I don't, yeah, sort of somewhat like, you know, more activist work. Like they thought I was going to be tying myself to trees or taking over oil tankers. And so I think that was sort of their vision for what environmentalism looked like. And when I was doing kind of stewardship related activities in high school, I was doing beach cleanups. So they were also like, how are you going to turn beach cleanups into making a living? So I think like, yeah, I think I agree with Lindsay sort of how important it is to make what we do more visible. And so it's great, Wenda, you're doing what you're doing by like showing that, you know, an arborist is like a very kind of important and you know, worthwhile job for people to have if they care about the environment, and of course Augustina's work as well. Yeah, so just wanted to kind of like, yeah, thank everybody for continuing to share their stories and making this work be more visible and seen.
Thank you very much, Novum, for that. And I just wanted to invite Lindsay. I know you wanted to share a couple of thoughts. Please go ahead.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I probably not answering any of the 8 questions, but maybe all of them. Like as I listened to the 2 other talks and the conversation now, I feel like I heard 3 themes emerge. And the power of story, which we've already talked quite a bit about, to share life lessons, to mobilize others, to envision and enact new worlds. But I think we also heard a lot about the power of nature as a connector, connecting to something larger than yourself, across culture, across religion, but that's a possible and a potential. It's not an automatic. There are people who feel more or less safe and included kind of in public space. There are structural barriers around who can do that connection more easily or less easily. So there's a lot of work to do to open up that space of connection for all. And then the third is about this brokering role of stewards. And I think it relates to what Novum was just saying about paid and unpaid work. I mean, I think it really is a both and. If people want to make this their paid career, their vocation, we need to have multiple entry points for people to get into the conservation and natural resources field. But we also need to hear from those people for whom this is a passionate avocation, that there is no paid job because maybe they're doing something that's really coloring outside the lines, and maybe eventually that turns into a job. Augustina talked about starting with a group of friends, building a mass social movement and essentially bringing the decision makers along with her. And I see that again and again in stories of stewards that come from kind of the civil society realm. But I also heard brokering in Wenda's story. It was Adrina's thing about one tree at a time, sort of, she's in her words, connecting between being a salesperson and a steward, but that her integrity bridges these two roles. She's transmitting knowledge and information kind of across these sectors or worlds. And I think stewards do that work. They build flexibility, they transmit information, and they work across sectors and help us, be more creative and flexible. And we need that in order to adapt to the kind of crises that are here and now and that are coming. So those are just the three themes that I heard coming out. And I know there are many more. I just wanted to offer that synthesis.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. And I know, Augustina, you wanted to offer a few thoughts as well. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Adrina. And I will go to talk also to share a little bit about this, to respond, about this paid and unpaid work. But before, there is a question was addressed for me in the chat that will I be able to go back to my initial committee with the same project after you left for Jakarta? This is the question for me. Yes, I came back to my hometown, but the place will not be the same. Of course, I don't have house there anymore. Me and my grandma, where we lived together before, after that house was destroyed, we don't have this place anymore to live, and they live in different regions right now. But for me, places never be the same, because that time that was already make me like, I don't have home anymore. And then this is also, then when I decided, I feel like, now wherever I live, this is my home. Like, I just feel like myself just belongs to universe. So it doesn't matter where I live. So yeah, but my community at the same time, because this wetland update was really huge, then I have a chance to empower more women in my regions as well, and they take a lead. And now it's massively also happening in my all regions where I was living as well. So yeah, this is what I can share about the questions. But regarding before this about paid and unpaid work as well, that there is one thing that I don't mention yet, but now I'm also working for Ministry of Waste. It's a social enterprise from UK where we do waste management in Indonesia. So we are working on building some facility which manage waste in some of regions. And at the same time, I also work for others company in Estonia, which is doing campaign about e-democracy, where also engage a lot of people to do a good campaign. And for me, for example, when I don't, this is not because I don't get paid. For example, that there is some sponsor where they are offering me, for example, like, to work like professionally in the movement where I get paid monthly and etc. But I myself reject this because I just dedicate myself and choose this as how to say, my stewardship journey, like, you know, my place for me, like, to share. And I feel, and for me, in these cases, I can share that I feel more powerful by working as a volunteer in our movement in World Cleanup Day, for example, because where then I can involve so many volunteers, where working with the government and corporate is much easier, because then, you know, like, no one pay me, so I can say whatever I want to say, and I can speak, like, you know, really freely, and I can do really freely too, because I don't have to you know, follow everyone, for example. But in another hand, I work also that I have my own job, which is pay for my bills monthly. Of course, like, you know, I have family too. I have to take care of my mom and my brothers and sister and etc. But yeah, what I say that that different people maybe just different way they do, but me myself, I also make living from this waste problem, where I dedicate myself, for example, by working with waste management company. So thank you.
Thank you, Augustina, for that. And I do have a follow-up question, which is actually a question that I had earlier about how did you manage in the decade that you've worked on all of this to mobilize so many volunteers, now in the millions? And to do that, you know, as a woman, and then on this effort on waste. Those are two, especially for many countries and cultures, and I can speak for mine as well, that it's pretty difficult as a woman to gather that, you know, that support. And then around cleaning up of waste and the millions of tons that you mentioned are produced daily.
Thank you, Lisa. So first, yeah, I just want to, I remember that, yeah, when I met you that time, I was working with one of media company, which is they have a cleanup program in Jakarta. That was the first time I led their cleanup program and bring everyone to work, you know, just schools and everyone to come on board together in Jakarta to clean up Jakarta. But, you know, but in Jakarta itself, like, we really have serious problem with that, because we don't have landfill, like, you know, the landfill already full, and the people don't know where to bring their waste. And it was just, you know, really, I mean, we have the biggest landfill in Southeast Asia right now in the next city close to Jakarta. It's called Bantar Gebang. But this is why then we start this movement with all the volunteers that to bring this. It was really urgent for everyone to take a part. But I faced like so many challenges as a woman as well. For example, where we still live in conservative community in so many places, where that I was rejected as a woman leader, for example, where the people don't want to work because I'm a woman leader, and, you know, they just change. And right now it's exactly just like happening like few months ago, when the people reject me as well, you know, like, you know, we have different culture, we don't work with a woman because woman, you know, leading and etc. So this is happening. It's break my heart, because, like, for me, like, it doesn't matter that I'm a woman or not. That what matter is that we work for the same missions, and then we clean our planet and we clean our country. But in some of culture, it is hard. So I would say that I still have this challenge right now. So in so many places, that when I talk, even like, it's really hard basically sometimes, when the people don't want to listen, just because I'm a woman, for example. And then they easily like to talk to, you know, to other people, but they don't talk directly to me. Like, for example, like, yeah, you know, we have different culture, we don't work with woman leader, for example. But this is what's still happening. And but for me, that I will never stop, that, like, you know, just it's easy sometimes to work as a woman leader, or as a volunteer, on as activist, which is like really clear position. For example, when we don't want to work with some organization or corporate, we just say, okay, no, we don't work with you. But what is hard basically, that as someone like in my position, for example, where we are as a woman leader, but we are not we don't reject anyone, but we always like be in the middle, which is we hold anyone together. Like, okay, corporate, you want to work with us, talk, and you guys from conservative community that we are receiving everyone, and then we also holding government hand basically to work together with us. This is this kind of position which is like not easy for me, that so many issues out there, like that like Agustina get paid, you get paid from this company, that's why you do this, you get paid from the government where you do this. For me, that no, I don't, I have my own job, but this is what I do. But it's always something like this. It doesn't matter whatever we are doing, basically, that there is always people like reject us or don't want to work with us. That particularly in my case, like women and have some experience with this kind of people. Yeah, I would say it's sometimes hard, but just don't give up. Just do our thing.
Thank you, Agustina. That's really incredible. And I believe you're now based in Estonia. Is that correct?
I right now come back to Indonesia, but sometime I sometime I come back to Estonia because I work there. But yeah, but right now I stay in Indonesia. So yeah. But well, when I'm in my hometown, for example, I cannot talk freely. So I always be inside of my house, not really come out, and always, I have to cover myself and etc. And because a few years ago, also when I decided, for example, I'm not wearing my hijab anymore, then so many people doing discriminate on me, and I was losing so many friends, for example. So yeah, this is also one thing where the people don't want to listen to me because I don't wear hijab, for example, in some of location. So yeah, this kind of also condition, which like not many people want to talk about it. Like, okay, you are Muslim, but you are not Muslim anymore. We don't want to listen to you. So people don't really see that. Don't see that what is a good thing. Like just busy with symbol. So yeah, this I could say. Yeah, but in my case, it's like so many story that I don't tell, basically. Then even if I read my story right now, that sometimes I check with some people who work in public, in law, for example, in law firm, and then I have to check, like if I want to tell, even my book, for example, if I read, when I read my book, like even publisher will ask, like, are you crazy? You want to really publish this kind of thing, for example? It was really dangerous for me, like. So yeah, I don't publish my book yet. So many like untold story that I didn't tell, just because like I don't have my fully freedom to talk and fully freedom to write what I want to write. So yeah, I hope one day that I have all the freedom I want to have, and easily, and to work and to talk, and yeah, I hope.
Thank you. It takes so much courage to even just share this today with us. We really do appreciate that.
And
Wenda?
I just wanted to add to what Agustina said. It really triggered me when the thing is, I'm hearing this extraordinary courage, and it seems like with women in stewardship, in order to garner respect and to have people listen to us, we have to go and, there's a lot, I'm putting my own words into this, self-sacrifice, and we have to do extraordinary things in order to just have, a small group of people to listen. And then once that gets rolling, it's sort of like you have to let go, and you have to, there's things that you have to, there's a compromise. Like, I had to compromise my my physical health. I was getting sick from the stress, but it's like that motivation and that drive is just so extraordinary. And then I think back on, in terms of equity, like, some of my coworkers, they do amazing things, but they didn't have to climb these mountains just to do what, just like they just do a minuscule amount to accomplish the same thing that it took me decades to just hear my people to hear my voice. So I just want to acknowledge, what Agustina, everything from, having to the barriers with her culture and her religion, and then to do these extraordinary things. And now, okay, I've got your attention. Now I have this respect. It doesn't have to be like that, because we just have to do little things. We're working towards the environment. So.
Thank you so much, Wenda, and thank you, everyone. And yet, I mean, the last few minutes has really made me think about this idea of, and I love how Lindsay kind of summed it up into the power of story, the power of nature as a connector, and then this idea of the brokering role of stewards. But this other kind of piece that's come out is this idea of censorship and the obstacles that that women have to face, and sort of these feats of courage just to feel heard a little bit. And I think that's really an important point in this discussion that often is sometimes overlooked. So thank you all for sharing your experiences and your stories with this, both sort of the good news stories as well as all these challenges. And hopefully, I mean, what we want to do with this discussion is continue these conversations so that we create this international community of practice to not just yes, to come and share, but also to share strategies and solutions for overcoming some of these challenges, to help with connecting people between our networks, for mentorship purposes, and just advice around the world, and again broadening our minds in these different perspectives. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, our panelists. Our conversation today touched on stories and community ties, the different types of stewardship, the engagement and mobilization of people, this idea of paid and unpaid work. And then, as Lindsay had said, this idea of kind of stewardship as it's an accessible form of civic engagement, which really resonated with me. Lindsay touched on fostering, she said, meaningful, inclusive, and reciprocal stewardship. And we didn't talk too much about the reciprocal piece, but I think that's really important. And also that stewardship groups are not just environmental groups. Wenda, you commented on how climbing trees brings you happiness, and that just stuck with me from like an hour ago, and I love that, and that resonated with me because I think that the pursuit of stewardship is really also about joy and about bringing people together and making our spaces more meaningful and more positive for the lives that we want to live as communities. And in contrast, Augustina, you shared at the beginning the volatility in your community growing up, how the violence and abuse was a driver for your stewardship, and and in your pursuit of uniting people on this common ground with what you said is a mission of love, which is just beautiful. So, I mean, in sum, I want, again, we're very grateful for your time, for your insights. Thank you all for being here, our panelists, all our participants, and again, for broadening our perspectives in urban natural resources, the management of these spaces, and the variety of motivators that drive you to continue your important work. So with that, I just, again, very grateful, and I want to invite everybody to join Liza and I for our next episode, which will be the 4th in the series on May 12th, as a precursor, I guess, also to the discussion around women and citizen science and scientists and what that means. So we hope you can join us for the next episode. If you can't, that's okay. We record all the sessions and we do post them on our YouTube channel. And I'm actually just putting in I'll put in the links in the chat for all of the different the groups that we have, and also an email if you wanna email us and have any questions moving forward.